some physical
So in a way, it's a process of transition
Yeah.
that creates the work.
It's just the potential that exists. That's all energy is. It's not a physical entity any more than time is some sort of little entity flying around in space. Time is just a fiction that we've invented just as a convenience to describe the rate at which events occur. And
all of a sudden now we're supposed to think that it's an entity in and of itself.
yeah, and we could travel in it, you know. Like
Maybe pretty soon they'll have time particles, like they have
Yeah.
gravitons and things like that.
Timatons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chronotons. Oh no, I better not say something like that. Next thing you know, I'll be seeing it in print.
Yeah, they'll think that's a great idea. Tesla has a very interesting take on iron, for instance, here. He talks about it in terms of electricity. Let's see. Unless we should make a radical departure in the character of the electric currents employed, iron will be indispensable. Yet the advantages it offers are only apparent. So long as we use feeble magnetic forces, it is by far superior to any other metal. But if we find ways of producing great magnetic forces, then better results will be obtainable without it. In fact, I have already produced electric transformers in which no iron is employed and which are capable of performing 10 times as much work per pound weight as those with iron. This result is attained by using electric currents at a very high rate of vibration produced in novel ways instead of the ordinary currents now employed in industries. I've also succeeded in operating electric motors without iron by such rapidly vibrating currents, but the results so far have been inferior. He has a whole different take on...
Now, he's talking about replacing iron with aluminum.
Yes.
You see, now, you see which way he's moving towards something that's lightweight. And I have heard this before, that aluminum can be made to function as a ferromagnetic material.
Aluminum?
Yes.
How about that? And you feel that Tesla might have been onto this?
Yes. I think he might have developed this. He disclosed that he had a special generator that his description of this generator's output was so phenomenal that it's almost incredible. But he said it was composed of aluminum, iron, and copper combined in an unusual or novel way. And so I've been mystified by this for quite some time. And there's one of watt-hour meters.
This is what you were alluding to, or you feel that Tesla was alluding to, this being a Tesla invention originally, where he basically this is an elaboration on his unipolar generator, which he was experimenting with. This might have been one of the ultimate results of it. Could you go further into
Well, I just kind of stumbled across this with at the time, back in the late 70s, I had an apartment in my house, and I wanted to know how much electricity was being used internally in that one apartment. So I picked up a couple of antique watt-hour meters in Albuquerque at a salvage place, but these were antiques, and they were 2 110 meters, which I've been told are very expensive now to get one of those kind of meters. But anyway, I got these for a couple of dollars a piece. And I hooked them up in the apartment, but there were no labels on what was the in wire and what was the out wire. These were so antique that they just had posts on there for connecting wires, and there was no label. So I just kind of figured out, well, let's see, I'll run the in wires in here, and I'll have 2 of them to do 220 for this apartment. Well, apparently I hooked them up backwards, and what they would do is the meter would spin quite rapidly when power first started to be used in the apartment. And the more power, they began to slow down, and finally they would get, when the power usage was higher, they would just sit and vibrate. And I called it snoring, because these things made a vibration. The whole house would vibrate with these things. I mean,
really? Yeah.
Yeah, it'd make the whole house shake. And if the power usage went up higher, they went in reverse. And the electric bill on the whole complex dropped by about 1/3. So these meters appear to be
electricity into the system.
They appear to be generating power. And so I just got to, when I was at a salvage place looking for some metals and whatever, in my little inventor trip that I do, and there was an old man there, and his name was Dort, and he was from Virginia, and he says, my father invented, and I started talking to him about these watt-hour meters, because he was interested in this sort of stuff, and he says, well, my father invented the original generator that's used on highly top secret Navy subs today. And
Here we go with
it
the
was
subs
based
again.
on a Tesla invention, and the Nazis stole it. And now the government uses it, and it's highly classified. And I told him about these meters. He said, when that meter is stationary and vibrating, he said, that's the center of load. He says, aluminum is the reflector, and copper is the active element, and iron is the magnetic. And he said that this kind of technology was incorporated in his father's invention, which is a Tesla oscillator. And in investigating these Tesla oscillators, Tesla had an oscillator in the 1890s that had a little piston in it that was driven by compressed air. And it only had to vibrate about 1/16 of an inch, just hum. But the inductors, there were two inductors that were on a shaft that the piston was attached to, and these two inductors were just windings that cut the magnetic lines of force in these two big cores, and the windings were over 50 miles long in that. And so that would correspond to what Tesla talked about, 925 mile wavelength, which would be for the Earth about 13 and a half cycles per second. And this is what they use for ELF technology. And that means that the Navy submarines are not, that the ELF waves are used not only just to transmit messages, they're also used to transmit power. So the submarines actually, and this is what the Germans used in their electro U-boats.
Always the underlying theme of submarines and submarine power.
Yeah,
being a clandestine type of piece of equipment to begin with, what better thing to power it?
Tesla said one of his greatest discoveries at Colorado Springs was the discovery of terrestrial waves that went from pole to pole. And that was one of the discoveries that he made. So basically this ELF technology would do nothing but like make this wave energy in the Earth accessible. And that would be how they would get a 13,000-mile range out of these submarines in World War II.
Well, we have up on the screen now Tesla's unipolar...
30,000 miles, take it back. 30,000 miles.
30,000.
That's a lot.
It sure is. His version of the unipolar generator, which, of course, as you can see, is very similar to the watt-hour meter, suspiciously similar in a lot of ways. And it's funny because when I heard you speaking about this once before, and even in your book, I'm thinking to myself, if this were to be true, that somehow they have surreptitiously been using this equipment, then I could pick up one of these meters somewhere, and the only working components, or the most relevant components, would be the disk and the magnets, and it would all be the same, and the rest of it would just be cosmetic or possibly a prop even. Well, that's pretty, stretching credulity to the limit, and I just wanted to see how far this idea went. So I went to my scrapyard, my local scrapyard, and was able to dredge one of these things up. Steve, can you get this? And as you can see, it's a I believe this is Westinghouse watt-hour meter, and it has, a lot of us have been looked at this from time to time in our backyard and wondered what all this wonderful dealy-bobs are up in the front here that runs all these great little dials and things, and it's just endless technology here. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe it isn't what Mr. Lyne is talking about because of all this wonderful stuff here. But if it's true, all this stuff would be irrelevant. And I look back here and I found that there were 2 screws, and only 2 screws, holding this to the rest of the apparatus. And when this drops off, what do you have left here is the disc, the aluminum disc, the magnet here, and 2 electromagnets in the back.
And Tesla said it was essential the magnets were weak.
This is a weak magnet right here, a weak permanent magnet right there.
The reason for the weak magnet is so the magnetic field can be reversed and oscillate as it bounces off the aluminum.
Right. So here we have a relatively modern version of this, and it's a Faraday disc or a Tesla disc, more properly termed, running the whole show. Now, what I'd like to do is compare this to an older meter.
Well, according to their theory, they're saying that when current passes through the flux, or rather, the flux runs counter to the electrical flux that's created by the electromagnet. The idea is that when the flux passes through the disk, it's supposed to create a thrust on the disk and turn it a certain direction. And then the metering gadget is supposed to measure the number of times per second or minute or whatever that this thing turns, and all these little gears, and show you all these little digits to measure the amount of current that you're using. But the truth of the matter is there's something here that bears looking at, because it's really a generator.
Now, what would be the purpose of them plugging in free energy generators to each of our houses?
It could increase the amount of power that they're actually being paid for. In other words, they could generate the seed power to make this thing oscillate, and then you would be billed for what the meter says you used, when in fact the meter is generating a lot of the power. Along with the poles and the plates underneath all the poles, they'll have copper plates under.
And you feel that the power stations alone wouldn't be enough to keep this moving along?
Yeah, I think. Well, the power that we get here comes from Four Corners region. That's way up in the north, on the corner of New Mexico is where that's coming from. And it just seems to me that there's an awful lot of power to be used there, and I don't know how they're generating that much up there for
Sure.
all the usage that's going on. I kind of tend to think that some of that power is coming from Earth source, and also from these little generators, which are also extracting that energy from the starlight or photon
Starlight?
energy, whatever you want. It's sometimes called starlight. Some people use the term zero-point energy, but that's an incorrect term. That's a relativist term. And that's the zero-point oscillations in the space-time continuum type of stuff.
We're back to that again.
The quantum fabric, or they use all these little weird terms. But that's not supposed to be true according to relativist theory, because you can never have one-half quantum. In other words, they use this all the time. They use this in the neutrino theory. But according to the relativist theory, you can never have a half quantum. You've got to have a full quantum, because the electron is indivisible.
Oh, right, yeah.
And that's not true.
Let's compare the fairly modern watt meter to something, again, we've dredged up in our little explorations. This thing is called a frequency relay. This is much older. This is circa 1930s, possibly. And as you can see, it has all the relevant components on it. It has the disk, the weak magnet, and the electromagnets, and a power resistor up here, but basically that's it. And this has an inhibitor that causes it to oscillate. So, your comments?
Yeah, it closes the switch. It shows here, it says close left at 61.9 cycles. Close right, they don't even show. But you see two little contacts, one here and one there. When this disc goes here, it closes that one. When it goes here, it closes this one. So it's oscillating back and forth. And I assume that it has something to do with these coils out here. But I don't know what a
aluminum.
Yes.
How about that? And you feel that Tesla might have been onto this?
Yes, I think he might have developed this. He disclosed that he had a special generator that his description of this generator's output was so phenomenal that it's almost incredible. But he said it was composed of aluminum, iron, and copper combined in timatons. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chronotons. Oh no, I better not say something like that. Next thing you know, I'll be seeing it in print.
Yeah, I don't think that's a great idea. Tesla has a very interesting take on iron, for instance, here. He talks about it in terms of electricity. Let's see. Unless we should make a radical departure in the character of the electric currents employed, iron will be ordinary currents now employed in industries. I've also succeeded in operating electric motors without iron by such rapidly vibrating currents, but the results so far have been inferior. He has a whole different take on...
Now, he's talking about replacing iron with aluminum.
Yes.
You see which way he's moving towards something that's lightweight. And I have heard this before, that aluminum can be made to function as a ferromagnetic material.
Indispensable, yet the advantages it offers are only apparent. So long as we use feeble magnetic forces, it is by far superior to any other metal. But if we find ways of producing great magnetic forces, then better results will be obtainable without it. In fact, I have already produced electric transformers in which no iron is employed and which are capable of performing 10 times as much work per pound weight as those with iron. This result is attained by using electric currents at a very high rate of vibration, produced in novel ways instead of the ordinary.
Some physical.
So in a way, it's a process of transition
Yeah.
that creates the work.
It's just the potential that exists. That's all energy is. It's not a physical entity any more than time is some sort of little entity flying around in space. Time is just a fiction that we've invented just as a convenience to describe the rate at which events occur. And
all of a sudden now we're supposed to think that it's an entity in and of itself.
yeah, and we could travel in it, you know. Like,
Maybe pretty soon they'll have time particles like they have
Yeah.
gravitons.